Hello and welcome to episode 35 of Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics, the podcast dedicated to revisiting each and every one of the so-called Walt Disney animated classics in chronological order, putting aside nostalgia and our own preferences and trying to objectively decide which ones are actual stone-cold classics and worthy of making our own rather prestigious list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. My name is Ben, and joining me as always is my good friend Liam. Liam, which film are we looking at this week?
Well, Ben, in your intro there, you used the phrase so-called animated classics, and I can't think of a better way to describe this week's film because we are looking at 2000's Dinosaur. Now, on this show, we're trying to curate our own list of animated classics, taking the best of the best from the Walt Disney animated classics and putting them onto our own refined Waly Gisnep animated classics. Don't worry about any of that this week because I can tell you with absolute certainty this film is going nowhere near that list because, oh boy, of all of the animated classics, this really is an anomaly. It's very, very strange and also incredibly bad and boring.
We've talked a little bit about how Disney gradually embraced CGI. Obviously, we're a good few films into Pixar's canon. Disney was wanting to respond. So with Dinosaur, they took a interesting approach. We've got live action backgrounds, so they shot these against real landscapes, and then put CGI dinosaurs over the top of them to varying effect.
Now, you say varying effect. I would say the effect is fairly consistent, and that is one of terrible Uncanny Valley. I mean, I didn't think it was possible to get Uncanny Valley with a dinosaur, but here we are.
Now, I just want to be clear from the off that the CGI was pretty good for the time. I'm not going to say it was great for the time. You know, this is post The Matrix, post The Phantom Menace, several years after Toy Story and A Bug's Life. But they were trying to do photorealistic for something we don't have any photos of, which is always going to be ambitious anyway. But just to be clear, the CGI doesn't help this film, but if this film had top quality Disney Renaissance animation, it would still be a bad film.
Absolutely. This film has a lot of problems, and the CGI is only one of them. In fact, in many ways, I kind of admire what they did with the project. I think filming live action backgrounds, even though so much of this film looks like it was shot on golf courses for some weird reason, it's all I could think of watching this. Taking live action backgrounds and adding in the impossible, i.e. an animated dinosaur, like this is the closest they could do at the time. I mean, it's not. They could have done what Spielberg did in Jurassic Park and had animatronics for some of it and then CGI where that wasn't feasible. But really, most of the problems in this film are in the writing and the execution rather than the animation, to be fair. Interestingly, it started as a Paul Verhoeven film in the late 80s. It was a project he really wanted to do. Something about RoboCop just made him go, you know what, let's do dinosaurs next. And he wanted to do it as a kind of Western where you've got the character, the man with no name, or in this case, the dinosaur with no name, comes into town and upsets the order, but it's for the better. And originally wanted to do it with like stop motion because obviously that was how you would have done it in the 80s, which having seen the stop motion in RoboCop, like why the hell would you want to work with that again? Because that is some of the worst parts of that film. But obviously it's just a nightmare project. I don't really get that premise of a Western with dinosaurs. And so it stayed in development hell for ages until Michael Eisner came along and he saw the opportunity so for a bit of context, during the 90s, Disneyland and Disney World saw just a massive boom. It's probably one of Michael Eisner's biggest successes alongside the Renaissance as CEO of Disney. And one of the big features in Disney World at the time was expanding beyond Epcot and the Magic Kingdom and introducing the Animal Kingdom off the back of the Lion King. And the original kind of ethos of the Animal Kingdom was to take animals from the past, the present, future, and fantasy and meld them all together and have a theme park based around that. And they had the present covered with off the back of The Lion King. Fantasy is something they wanted to do, but they had to pick the right property. And it's weird. They've obviously got like these huge IPs at Disney. You could have a big Maleficent dragon and stuff as a centerpiece of that, but finding a way of doing it was something they struggled with. But then for past, obviously dinosaurs fit really well into that. So Michael Eisner saw this project in development hell and was like, let's use this as a jumping off point to launch a dinosaur land in the animal kingdom. And this is the end product. And I think one thing that's very clear watching it is it's clearly a film made mostly for marketing purposes. One of the big changes that Michael Eisner insisted on was having dinosaurs that talked, which I get as a film, you want most of your characters to be talking. Obviously, the original Paul Verhoeven project, he was probably going a bit more weird and avant-garde with it and was like, let's have silent stop-motion dinosaurs and everyone will just have to get that it's a Western.
What are animals of the future? Are we talking like robot bears? Space lions?
I mean, I can only imagine it's robot bears and space lions, which I wish he had instead found a project to work on and launch that part of the animal kingdom. Though now I think about it, having seen Treasure Planet, maybe not the best idea either.
I mean, the sentence Paul Verhoeven wanted to make a stop-motion Western film about dinosaurs. There's a lot to unpack there. It's ironic as well that you mentioned The Man with No Name, because very sincerely, having watched this film twice, once very recently, I don't think I can name a single character from this film.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Ben, because one thing we've both discussed in regards to this film is, despite having previously seen it, we can never remember anything that's part of it. So I decided, let's have a bit of fun with this. Rather than go through a plot recap, I've arranged the plot in the form of a numbered quiz. And I'm going to ask you some questions and just see how much of this film you remember. And what's really interesting is, just earlier we had some technical difficulties. We've already done the first question. I genuinely am not sure you will remember the answer to this first question.
I was about to say the same thing. But we've already recorded this and I genuinely don't know if I can remember the answer.
Because a nice simple question, the heart of any film, question number 1, what is the name of our protagonist?
Okay, well our protagonist is a dinosaur. Do I get any points for that?
No.
Okay. They're sort of a nondescript dinosaur. They're medium-sized in the world of the dinosaurs. Now, I can remember part of their name because their first part is Alla, or Allo, as in like an Allosaurus, which is a type of dinosaur. Now, I think... I always want to say Allosaur, but I think that's too close to Allosaurus, so I think it's Aladar.
Well, I'm glad you remembered, because we're now 1 for 1. Our hero is Aladar, the iguanodon. This is the protagonist. This is the person we're supposed to be rooting for and who we have to spend the film with. And we can't even remember his name most of the time. So, great start to this film. As a bonus question, Ben, can you name me any of Aladar's traits that make him our protagonist?
Now, my instinct says that this is a trick question because I don't think Aladar has any defining characteristics or traits.
It is a trick question. I put down that he doesn't have any. Just to let everyone know, when I wrote these questions a couple of days ago, I had to make a note of the answers because I didn't even trust myself to remember what any of the answers were. So we have our protagonist, Aladar, but the film opens with... Oh god, I love the opening of this film. There are several points throughout this film I will find myself just laughing hysterically, and the only reason I can think of is that I just have no idea what's happening. And right away, the opening is one of those. We open with narration by the great Alfre Woodard is in this film, and she has the opening and closing narration, and the opening narration is, some things start out big, some things start out small, but sometimes the smallest things can make the biggest changes of all. Now, I've seen this film twice at this point. I have no idea how anything that she just said relates to anything in the film.
Because Aladar, written it down, because Aladar, he's not that small.
He's a medium dinosaur.
He's a medium... I mean, he starts as a baby at the start of the film. He's in an egg. So, I guess that makes some sense. But then all the dinosaurs in the film presumably started in an egg at some point.
But also, he doesn't make that many changes.
Liam, I'll have to take your word for it on that because I can't remember what he does.
So yeah, we see an egg in a nest. and something happens that causes a carnosaur to attack all of the dinosaurs, and they all run away, and in doing so the carnosaur crushes all but one of the eggs. And then we follow this egg on this journey where it's being picked up and dropped by various predators, and the dinosaur inside survives somehow. But the dinosaur egg finds its way to a tree full of lemurs on an island off the coast. Which brings us to our next question. Ben, how does Yar react to finding the dinosaur egg?
Okay, well, you've immediately thrown me off there by referencing what I can only assume is another character in this film.
There's so many questions where I just use the character name, and I'm hoping you'll understand what's happening.
So we've got past the opening, which I would describe as both cinematic and incredibly boring. And we've got to the lemurs. And what was the question?
How does Yar react to finding the dinosaur egg?
Okay, there's two lemurs. One of them wants to keep him, but the other, and I'm going to say this is La wants to kill him.
He wants to kill him. He wants to throw him out of the tree.
Yes! But then he's charmed by the dinosaur's ability to piss on him.
We're 5 minutes into this film, and we already have a wee joke.
Now, we've already slagged off the CGI a bit, but I think the faces on the lemurs are the worst part of this film. Whether they're in motion or not, they look horrible.
I would argue that they're the second worst thing in this film. I'd argue that the worst thing is the characterization and voice performance for Zenny, which is Max Casella, and he's basically doing... Well, I think this came first, but he's doing the performance he did for Daxter in Jak and Daxter. So I'm assuming someone at Naughty Dog saw this film and was like, that's what I want.
And then their friend said, why? So Zenny then must be the son/brother of the other lemurs, and they've given him a series of lines of dialogue, which... The best way I can describe them is they have the structure of jokes, but there's nothing comedic about them. And I'm not saying they're jokes that aren't funny. I'm saying they're jokes with no element of humour whatsoever.
Like I say, someone at Naughty Dog saw this and went, that's what we want. That's a joke for all of you out there who have played Jak and Daxter.
I don't know why we're pausing there as if they're going to speak up. It's a podcast that's pre-recorded.
So yeah, the kind of premise then, I suppose, is that Aladar is raised by lemurs. And genuinely, I don't know why this is relevant at all in the film.
Well, spoiler warning, it's not, because after the first 20 minutes, the lemurs are barely in it. There's a line where they say, we'll teach it to hate meat, in reference to raising a dinosaur.
But I'm pretty sure it's a herbivore anyway.
Well, I was thinking that, but also I was picturing, are we going to get a series of Brave New World style social conditioning experiments where, you know, he's forced to eat meat and then they sort of spray him with cold water and blaring sirens play, so just psychologically he's damaged enough to just hate meat on sight.
So I've looked it up, and iguanodons not only were herbivores, but apparently were duck-billed, and I believe the reason they changed this was so that they could have a talking dinosaur, and they needed lips for it to be a talking dinosaur, even though, I mean, what have they done for the last 70 years with Donald Duck? But also, if you encounter that problem, change the dinosaur. Don't alter the dinosaur you have, just be like, okay, we'll just change it to a different dinosaur that doesn't have a duck bill. So we jump forward immediately to see an adult Aladar hanging out with the lemurs, which brings me to my next question. Ben, something tragic happens and a meteor strikes. Can you remember what the lemurs are doing when the meteor strikes?
I can. This is one of the very few notes I made on this film. So, Zenny, is that the annoying... Sorry, let me rephrase that. Zenny, is that the most annoying one?
Yes, that is the most annoying one.
So, they've been getting ready for... I guess it's like the monkey mating season, the MMS.
Great way to start your film, by the way.
It's a bit weird. So everyone in the tribe is like hooking up, and no one wants to hook up with Zenny, and everyone else has partnered up, and they're like, oh, we've got, you know, a bachelor still in the tribe. Well, first off, if you'd done basic maths, you'd have known that was going to happen, because if everyone else was paired up, you'd have known there'd be one left over.
No, they did the math. It's just that one of the other male monkeys was really impressive.
But also, once they've all paired up, they all just climb into the tree, and I just feel like the subtitle would read, And now the monkey orgy.
So yeah, the answer I've got for this is monkey orgy.
Just out on a side note, did you actually write monkey orgy? Because I wrote monkey orgy.
I did write monkey orgy. For potential bonus points, can you remember either of Zenny's pickup lines that he was practicing before the ritual?
Okay.
There's two. If you can get either of them, I'll give you a bonus point.
Okay, there's one bit I can remember. I don't know if this is one of his pickup lines, but he says something like, "The love monkey is in and I'm seeing patience." It's something like horrible like that.
First of all, that doesn't make sense. The love monkey is in and I'm seeing patience.
Well, no, the implication is that he's the love monkey. They're not two unrelated facts. It's not, the love monkey's in also...
Why would a love monkey be seeing patience?
I may have... I see what you mean. I assumed the title Love Monkey had automatic medical connotations, but when you repeat it back, it's very clear that it doesn't.
So we have, "Hey sweetie, if you'll be my bride, I'll groom ya," which, it's fairly clever. It's a terrible pickup line, but as a bit of writing goes, well done to that writer.
I mean, if a monkey in real life said it, I'd be impressed, but only because it was a monkey speaking.
And there's another one which I think you were thinking of, which is, "I'm known as the Professor of Love and school's in session."
That is it.
All delivered in the terrible Max Casella performance.
So this is the thing, is I don't think the voice performances in this film are good, but I do wonder whether it's hard for me to disassociate what I'm seeing with what I'm hearing. Like, I think of a character like Frollo, who has such a commanding presence on screen, and I think that's a superb voice performance, but also I'm very conscious that the way that character is animated is so expressive and convincing, and nothing in this film is expressive or convincing. So does that harbour the voice performances, or are the voice performances already bad and then they're stapled onto something that looks awful?
So I was thinking about this because you're right, I don't like DB Sweeney as Aladar. I think just a generic American voice coming out of this dinosaur, it doesn't fit. But then we've got Alfred Woodard in this film, who is consistently great, and I always believe this character of Pleo, the matriarch of the lemurs. And I'm not sure if it's just that Alfred Woodard's voice has a sort of maternal quality to it, and maybe it's also that, you know, a lemur is humanoid, so seeing it speak with a human voice maybe isn't as jarring. But the fact that that performance works, I'm not going to say it fits, I'm going to say it works at the very least. And none of the others do. I think it's bad performance all round as well.
Yeah. I don't have anything else to say other than yeah.
So as we were saying, it's the monkey mating season, and they go up into the leaves to have the monkey orgy, and then the meteor hits in the most exciting moment of the film, because you're like, oh, it might end.
Liam and I genuinely, when we were both watching this film, were like, I really hope the credits are long. I think they're 8.5 minutes, by the way, so they're pretty long.
And you might be thinking, oh, I won't need that information, but trust me, if you watch this film, you're going to stop at several points to see how long is left, and that 8.5 minutes is not going to seem long enough. So Ben, for our next question, do you remember how Aladar and the lemurs escape the meteor?
Well, they all start running. I remember that. They were kind of running across their little lemur island.
That's the answer. They run away from it. It's a classic way of escaping a meteor.
Well, they run away from it, but then... So, the 4 main monkeys jump on Aladar, all the rest die, and they're never mentioned again, just so you know.
I forgot that all the rest die.
There's like a line where they're like, no one else made it, and then that's it. They just never mention it again.
It's lucky we adopted a dinosaur that can run faster than a meteor explosion.
Yeah, they're pretty chill about their home being destroyed and everyone they've ever known being killed. But there's a specific shot where Aladar jumps off a cliff into the sea, and it's one of the stupidest things I've ever seen.
So this is probably a good place to mention this, but I don't think I like dinosaur stories. I remember thinking this when we watched Fantasia, and there's The Rights of Life, I think it is, which is this 20-minute extended sequence that features at least 10 minutes of dinosaurs. And there's something about quadrupedal animals that it's really hard to make them interesting. I have no idea how The Lion King pulled it off, but I've never seen anyone pull it off with dinosaurs. People think The Land Before Time is good. It's not. It has an emotional opening, then very little happens for 50 minutes, and then there's an ending.
Well, there's The Good Dinosaur, Liam. That film is fine.
But that film also has a bipedal human in it. Like when people say, well, what about Jurassic Park? Jurassic Park is good because of the humans. If it was just dinosaurs, it would be crap.
Now, I genuinely prefer the Fantasia sequence because they've gone for...
Oh, I prefer it, but I mean, that's a low fucking bar.
What I mean is, okay, the reason I prefer it then is they said we're going to do, not exactly photorealistic, obviously they're animated, but we're going to do realistic looking dinosaurs behaving like dinosaurs. What the film Dinosaur does is it goes, they don't look realistic, right? But for the time and for what they were trying to do in the animation style, they look realistic and it got a lot of praise at the time. So let's say, for the sake of argument, these look realistic. Then they try and do the live action Lion King thing of also having them have semi-humanoid faces and expressions. Now, dinosaurs aren't intrinsically expressive, so you've got to make their faces quite weird for that. And I think either you have to go down the line of, it's a very different comparison point, but something like Ice Age, where they are ancient animals, but they're quite cartoony, and that works a lot better. Whereas something like this, where you try and have, they move and they act like dinosaurs, but also they jump off cliffs and zing one-liners at each other, it doesn't work.
So Ice Age is a good comparison point, because I have similar problems with Ice Age, where I think a lot of the action falls flat. There's something about the limitations of a quadrupedal animal that there's very few things you can actually do with it. And of those few things, very few of them are interesting. One thing that's interesting is a stampede. In fact, I think that's the only thing that's interesting.
Do you think a stampede would be interesting if it was very slow and took days and went through the desert?
Well, you see, that's not a stampede, that's a migration. And anyone that would think, oh, let's make a film about a migration is daft.
What's my next question, then?
Your next question, then, Ben, is where are the dinosaurs heading?
I don't think the place is ever given a name. I think it's just vaguely referred to as the breeding ground. Now, sorry, I just needed a moment there just to get my head around it. So... here's what the situation is. So Aladar and the monkeys, they're wandering through the desert. So they escape the meteor that blew up their islands, and then they wash up on the beach, which is also a desert. And then they start walking, and then there's some little carnivores that start bothering them, and then they encounter this big group of dinosaurs that are migrating, and a lot of them are dicks. And it's established that they're heading to their mating ground. Hang on, let me check I've got this question right first. Is it the mating grounds, not the breeding grounds? Those are two very different things.
It's the nesting grounds, but still, this kind of raises an interesting point in that we've seen two species so far, primates and dinosaurs, and all we've seen of them so far is that they breed. Because when you're dealing with animals that don't have a functioning society, it's very basic what they do, and how can you mine that for drama? This is what I mean about really animal films in general. Mining them for drama is really hard if you don't have a good idea. The Fox and the Hound is a good idea. You can mine that for drama. The Lion King is a good idea, and you're focusing on the family structure, so you can mine it for drama. Just dinosaurs going about their life isn't interesting. And the thing that annoys me is dinosaurs were around for millions of years. And
what? No one told me this.
And every dinosaur story is obsessed with the extinction period and when everything's falling apart and oh no, the world's going terribly, we need to go somewhere safer. Because I guess there was no interesting drama for those millions of years.
I mean, the same argument's used for Nixon only being remembered to the Watergate scandal. So, back to what I was saying about this migration then. So, it's kind of implied, although I don't think it's ever said, that all these other dinosaurs, of which there's a varying amount depending on how much they want to animate, it seems to be about 100, going from where they normally live to the nesting grounds, which you go, okay, that makes sense.
I think I know what you're going to say here.
Well, so it's implied that their area's been destroyed. Well, yeah, I'll just say it. Why don't they just live at the nesting ground? Because to get there, they have to walk for days through the desert and then stop at the watering hole and then walk for more days through the desert to get to this lush, verdant and protected area. I mean, I know there are migratory animals that have to move because they eat all the food. Elephants and things like that. They eat everything and then they move on to the next area and then they eat everything there. So I guess that's the logic. But then all that means is, if that is the case in this film, that once they get there, they're just going to eat everything and then starve to death.
Presumably, yes.
Also, if this is the start of... It's not the meteor that wipes the dinosaurs out, but it's certainly overtones of that. So again... If that's happening anyway, they're already knackered. I mean, I'm not saying I just want, just before the credits roll, a little black and white text box pop up and say, all these dinosaurs starved to death within 6 months. But that's probably what happened.
So once again, this is the issue of it coming down to just bad writing and bad conception. The idea of a Western with dinosaurs can work, but changing it to a migration, because, okay, so essentially what we have here is Aladar stumbles upon the migrating herd and he's amazed. He's never seen dinosaurs before, and so he is an outsider. For our next question then, Ben, actually, before we move on, can you tell me who is leading the migrating herd?
I can't. He is a dinosaur that I think is meant to be of the same species as Aladar, but maybe not, but he's just a big prick.
Apparently he's the same species, but he looks completely different, probably because he's the dinosaur equivalent of a movie jock, so they had to make him bigger and bulkier. But his name is Kron, and he has a sister.
Kron.
This is our Disney villain for this film.
It's
Kron.
And this is my son, Kron.
He has a sister, Neri, and for a bonus point, can you tell me how Neri describes Aladar when they first interact?
Oh, I think she says he's charming.
She does, she says he's charming. Apparently dinosaurs have a very loose definition of charming.
Now, what's weird... I was going to say what's weird about this sequence. Let me rephrase that. What's lazy about this sequence is Aladar's walking along and they go, we're going to introduce this migratory herd, and you go, okay, and he bumps into some of the dinosaurs. He's like, wow, dinosaurs, I've never seen them before. And then Kron, sorry, I just find that name funny. Then Kron comes over and is like, oh, don't be messing with me. And then she comes over and she's like, I think you're quite hot. And then they both just naff off. And it's like, right, we just need 2 lines of dialogue for each of these characters to go, this is the bad guy, this is the love interest, and then that's it. You never get anything further than that. That's what those characters are. They have no arc, they have no characteristics. They're just there to serve the plot in those 2 very basic roles.
It's the most efficient characterization I think we've seen in a while, and efficiency's not always the best thing to go for, but we've got more characters to introduce, so quick question, Ben. Do you remember who Earl is?
So, there's 2 old dinosaurs at the back. No, is there 3 old dinosaurs? No, there's 2 old dinosaurs, and then 1 dinosaur which is inexplicably a dog as well. So 2 of them are kind of old lady dinosaurs. One of them's is it a Brontosaurus? The very, very tall ones. I used to call them Diplodocuses, but I think that's a made-up term. And also a Triceratops. And they both say we're the last of our kind. So, not to put too much of a dampener on things already, again, but if there's only about 100 or so dinosaurs in this herd, even if they're all the same species, that's not enough genetic diversity and they'd die out. You need 2,000 breeding pairs for them to survive, so all these dinosaurs are going to die if they don't starve to death first. But even aside from that, back to your original question, I think Earl is the dinosaur dog, which is sort of like a baby Ankylosaurus, I think?
It's just a dinosaur dog. I don't have any other way of describing Earl.
If you'd flip to the question round of what's the dog dinosaur called, I could have filled the rest of the podcast guessing names and I wouldn't have got Earl.
It just stood out as such a strange thing, which leads me to another point, which is none of the carnivores talk. And I don't know why this is. Either the small carnivores that chase Aladar and the lemurs when they first get to the mainland, or the big carnosaurs, none of them talk. And I think the reason is because it would be weirdly morbid to have intelligent speaking creatures eating other intelligent speaking creatures. And I don't really understand that logic, because I think children deal with... That sounds weird if I say children deal with that from an early age. I mean, in fantasy, you think of your Hansel and Gretel, where you've got witches, and one thing kids can say about witches when they're young is, oh, they eat people, they eat children. But for some weird reason, if you're going to have characters eating other characters, the ones who are doing the eating have to be monstrous in some way, and they can't be intelligent. And it just further reminds you that it's weird that our main characters are all talking.
I think from a narrative perspective, it's because the villain of the film is Kron. Is that his name?
It's Kron. Well remembered.
I'm going to have to start writing these down. I'm not even joking. Because Kron is the villain of it, and the carnivores are just kind of this plot device where basically if any of...
They're a force of nature.
Yeah, exactly. If any of the dinosaurs lag behind, the carnivores will eat them. The carnosaurs, is that what they're called?
I think they're called carnosaurs, which is very weird and confusing.
The carnivore carnosaurs. Now, would you say it's fair, Liam, to describe them as a T-Rex from hell?
Oh, sorry, they're Carnotauruses.
Carnotaurus. Okay.
And yes, they're just like... In fact, it reminded me of the Indominus Rex from not the latest, but one of the Jurassic World films. And that's a made-up silly dinosaur. So apparently I was like, why have a made-up silly dinosaur when there's a real one that's exactly the same?
It's a big red T-Rex that has devil horns on it. That's it.
And it's just this terrifying force of nature that will eat anyone who lags behind. So, yeah, as you said, we've got this kind of group of older characters who are falling behind. And I think what makes Aladar special is because he's grown up in a bubble, he doesn't realise that the world is survival of the fittest, so he wants to help them, as opposed to the rest of the herd who are just like, hey, if they're slow and they get left behind, they get left behind. And I'm thinking, is that literally why he's our protagonist? Is because he doesn't let these old dinosaurs fall behind and die?
There's a lot of points in this film where Kron and the other dinosaurs leading the herd are criticised for going too fast and not stopping. But what's their counter-argument to be is, you're right, we should just stay here where there's no food and water and just die. Like, it's better that 50% of the dinosaurs survive than none of them die, surely.
Exactly, so this is what I'm saying. I kind of get that I guess Aladar doesn't see it this way because he's an outsider, but you could have had him be like that without being an outsider. And also, it's not the natural way of things that if you weren't raised otherwise, well, that sounds horrible to say if you weren't raised otherwise, you'd be fine with letting old people die. But apparently, in the world of Dinosaur, that's the case.
Also, Aladar did leave behind a lot of his family, and they all died on an island that was blown up by a meteor. So he's one to talk.
Oh, before we move on, I've got another question about these old dinosaurs. And it's just simply, where are Baylene's nostrils?
Not only do I not know the answer to this question, I don't know who Baleen is. So I'm going to say forehead.
They're in her forehead.
Oh, wow.
So Baleen is the big brachio or brontosaurus. And I just tuned out whenever any of these characters at the back were talking. And it just hit a point in the film where I was looking at her and going, why are her nostrils in her forehead? I'd never noticed this about these dinosaurs before. But that's the level of engagement and entertaining we're talking about with this film. So we're at around the 30-minute mark in this film. And the rest of this film is just walking through desert.
The note I've written, and it's basically the only other note I have, is I hope you like tedious shots of dinosaurs in the desert, because that's what you get a lot of. I genuinely think it's because whatever they were doing with the animation process, they were like, okay, doing these really vibrant shots where it's moving through trees and stuff is really hard to animate against, so we'll just do brown, because that's easy.
I think it's just the nature of dinosaur stories, though. Again, I think of The Land Before Time. A lot of that is just walking through desert. The Rights of Life, that was just walking through desert. And I don't know which executives in these studios keep going, this is a good basis for a story, because it's so boring. And I think there are shows out there like, is it Walking with Dinosaurs? I think it may have even been a BBC thing, where they recreated what they think the world was like and they did CGI dinosaurs. From a documentary perspective, these things can be interesting. But as a 90-minute narrative, who cares? So yeah, we've got dinosaurs. They're walking through the desert. They reach a lake and it's completely dried up, so they just immediately start moving on. And I feel like Aladar should have had more opportunities to be an outsider and that be relevant. Because your next question, Ben, is how does Aladar find water?
That's a really good point, because you're right, there should be a bit in the opening where he's with the monkeys where they teach him how to get water out of this thing, and then he can go, hey, I learned this thing. But no, he gets the big, tall dinosaur just to stand on the floor and push it down and it forces water up out of it.
Yep, that's correct. The answer is pure happenstance. The big dinosaur steps on the floor and he notices that, it's looks like the ground is a bit loose. Keep pressing and then water starts coming up. And it's just like, okay, what a great sequence we have there and what a great protagonist we have to spend time with.
What it establishes is it's not the person who made the discovery, it's the person who can market themselves as making the discovery that matters in this world.
Because what do you do with a dinosaur? You can't have these big action set pieces and they can't use tools or be ingenious because it would break the world that you're trying to build, which, guess what? You've already broken that world by having them talk, so let's do something interesting with it instead. But yeah, the Aladar finds water, everyone comes running back. There's a bit where everyone is rushing around the water and he's like, no, there's enough for everyone, which there clearly isn't. And I'm just always asking, why is this the focus point of this story? Aladar has nothing spectacular about him, other than the fact he was raised by monkeys, which isn't relevant. I suppose he's kind-hearted, because we get a scene afterwards where he's showing the baby dinosaurs how to find water, and then Neri comes back and is like, hey, you're still charming, bye again. I'm sure more happens in that scene, but I can't remember it.
Why are you sure of that, when you've got no evidence to believe that anything more interesting happens in that scene?
It's a very good point. I retract my previous statement.
I'll say this, Aladar is less of a prick than Taran in The Black Cauldron. That's not saying a lot.
Hey, at least I've been able to come up with 20 questions for this film. I'm not sure I could come up with 5 for The Black Cauldron.
There's only so many ways you can word the word why.
So the dinosaurs move on and something else happens. We then cut to Bruton, which, next question, Ben, why was Bruton separated from the herd?
I think he and another one of Kron's henchmen, were sent to scout to look for alternative sources of water when it appeared the lake dried up, and then no one bothered to go and tell him that they'd found water 6 seconds later, causing him ultimately to die.
That's correct. Kron's lieutenant, Bruton, was scouting for water, because that's a sentence that makes sense in a dinosaur film.
Now, we've slagged off why dinosaur films don't work if you don't have human or other characters in, but even in the context of this film, wouldn't it make more sense if Kron had, like, really nippy little dinosaurs that was like, right, you're my scouts. You know, if you wanted to make it a bit more militaristic, it's like, right, you're my scouts, you guys are the big dinosaurs, so you're going to be carrying some, trees or whatever for us to eat, or some meat or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Rather than just like, they're all the same brown dinosaur.
But then you can't reuse the asset and tweak it slightly.
Yes, I'd forgotten about that.
We've actually entered a part of the film where my brain went blank at this point. I think I was laughing hysterically because I had no idea what was happening. But the herd moves on from the lake, and for some reason, Aladar and the slower dinosaurs don't.
If you're pausing because you're hoping I'm going to be able to help out, you are sorely mistaken.
I'm pausing because I'm genuinely trying to figure out what happens. I think the reason they get separated is because the plot requires it.
If I remember rightly, it's basically just because they're old and tired, which they've been throughout the whole film anyway, but they are more old and tired than they were at the start. Well, I suppose all the dinosaurs are older than they were at the start, but...
Yeah, I feel Aladar should have interacted with more people in the herd. More dinosaurs. They're not even close to people. More dinosaurs in the herd. Instead, he just sort of hangs around at the back with 2 old ladies and their pet dog. And this is interesting filmmaking, apparently.
I mean, okay, don't get me wrong. As a message to kids, it's not bad to say, hey, older people, they may move a bit slower, but... they've still got things to contribute. That is a valuable lesson.
It's a valuable lesson, but it isn't the second act of your major motion picture. So after falling behind, they stumble upon Bruton, who has been attacked, and he kind of refuses their help. But they just kind of separate and do whatever. But what even happens here? I think they go into a cave and it's raining or something.
Okay, so the way I remember this... Well, first off, Bruton does refuse their help, but also, I don't know what help they're offering, because they can't carry him. They've got no arms, as you say, so it's not like they're helping him walk. It's mostly just moral support. And then it starts raining, so they go and get shelter in a cave. And I was thinking, do dinosaurs care about the rain? They're not us, right? They're cold-blooded, so why would they care if they were wet or not? If anything... Given they're walking through a desert, you'd expect them to be quite happy about the fact they're out in the rain.
But Aladar was raised by lemurs who do care about the rain. So he thinks that rain is a bad thing because he's never thought otherwise.
That's as good a reason as any. Just to be clear, though, for anyone listening, that's not mentioned in the film. That's just our reading of it.
Which leads us to our next question. How does Pleo help Bruton?
Oh, I do remember this. She's one of the lemurs, if I remember correctly, and she finds this, healing herb that, she kind of puts on his wound so he feels better.
I mean, you're right, but I don't actually remember her putting it on his wound. She just points out the plant and says, we had these on our island, they'll help, and then leaves him to it. But it's like, he doesn't have thumbs. What is he going to do?
You can just roll in it. Hope some of it gets in there.
But yeah, so we see, I suppose, compassion from Aladar because he doesn't just leave Bruton to die, and Bruton's like, oh, you're not so bad, kid. Or at least that line should be in the film. Instead, Bruton just sits in the corner and sulks for a bit.
There's two things I really hate about this sequence. There's multiple things. There's two main things I hate about this sequence. One is, we've established that Kron and his cronies, if you will, thank you, are pricks because they don't care if dinosaurs get left behind and die. When they find Kron, the two older dinosaurs literally say, just leave him, we've got to keep moving. So the dinosaurs Aladar's staying behind to help, they don't give a shit if other dinosaurs fall behind and die, as long as it's not them. Secondly, what's he called? Bruton. Secondly...
We're leaving that in, by the way, because it really needs to be, sold that none of these characters are memorable.
I promise I'm not playing this up for the podcast. I genuinely cannot remember anything about this film. Bruton goes through this whole little redemption arc of, survival of the fittest. Oh, wait, if we're nice to each other, we can actually achieve more. And then he just dies. That's it. That's him done for the film. Move on. That character arc's resolved, and it'll never be referenced again.
Well, you've kind of answered the next question, which was how did the pack escape the Carnotaurs? Because as they're hiding in the cave, the two Carnotaurs find them. And how are they going to escape? How do they escape, Ben?
Well, the Carnotaurs find them because they look in the cave, and all the dinosaurs are like, shh, just stay still. I'm like, you're big dinosaurs. How do you think this works? Imagine looking in a cave full of bears and the bears just look, if we'll just press ourselves to the floor, they won't see. Of course you see them. They're massive. The Carnotaurs come in and Bruton causes a cave-in and everybody dies. Oh, not everybody dies. Aladar and the old dinosaurs and the monkeys get away, but one of the Carnotaurs and Bruton dies, and the other Carnotaur is wounded.
I am genuinely impressed that you remembered that Bruton causes a cave-in, because I'm looking through these questions and I don't remember that.
It's one of those things where if I didn't have the questions, I wouldn't know the answers. If you just asked me to describe this film, it would have been egg, meteor, kill some monkeys, post-monkey orgy, breeding grounds, that's it.
So everything in the desert is just gone?
Yes.
But you mentioned the breeding grounds. The pack managed to reach the breeding ground. Do you remember how they find the breeding ground?
Nope.
That's okay, because the answer is, once again, pure happenstance. They're walking through the cave and Zeddy sniffs it out because that gives him a reason to be there. And they dig through some rocks and they stumble upon the nesting ground. And I just keep thinking, there's so many caves that keep getting blocked by falling rocks. And I'm just thinking, what is going on in this world? Oh, I suppose meteors are hitting it.
Are they, though? Are they? Because we see some at the start, and then that's it.
I think the implication is that the reason the dinosaurs are migrating to the nesting grounds is because where they were is no longer livable, probably because of meat. Oh, who cares?
Certainly not the writers.
So yeah, the pack have found the nesting grounds. There's a bit where the annoying monkey does a cannonball into the water, And they're all like, yay, we're here, we're happy. Wait a minute, where are the others? They should have been here by now. And I just think, how do you know that? Like, you've taken a different route to them.
That's a very good point.
They were like, well, we're here and they were ahead of us. They must be here by now. It's like, yeah, you took a shortcut.
I've got nothing. Which
leads us to the next question, which is, why does Aladar leave the nesting grounds?
Okay, so I remember that. Oh, it's ridiculous. So the nesting ground, as far as I can tell, is like a big hollow, like crater. So it's just surrounded by mountains, and then there's this one valley that leads through into it, and that's had a landslide that's filled the whole valley, or a war within the valley, which seems unlikely. So I think Aladar leaves to try and show the dinosaurs there's another way around.
Basically, yeah, that's what happens. And despite the fact that they're a day or two behind the dinosaurs, Aladar manages to catch them just as they're reaching the other side of that landslide. So that's handy, I suppose.
So what it means is that they fell behind. They went in a cave. They went through the cave and found the breeding ground. Then Aladar went back through the same cave, went up to where they were and caught them up, all before they walked the distance to the breeding grounds.
Yes.
That's fine, makes total sense, and I have no further questions.
I mean, it's unfair to nitpick this film, but also, like, what else is there to do?
I feel at some point, just somewhere in a writer's room, there was a whiteboard and circled multiple times were the words magic caves ?
Magic caves and boring desert. So yeah, we get back to the herd who have found this landslide, and the leader, do you remember the leader's name?
Kron.
Kron.
Takes me a few seconds, but I can remember it.
The leader, Kron, is like, it's alright, we'll climb it. And Aladar shows up and is all like, you don't have to climb it, I've found a different route. And then just as he's saying that, the Carnotaur appears, and Kron, rightfully, is like, he led that thing right to us. And I'm like, yeah, he probably did.
Yeah, it's perfectly fair. But then they go, remember that bit in The Bug's Life where the ants say, hey, if we all stand up together, the bigger animals can't push us around? Well, that bit happens for a bit.
I also don't think that's true with this specific situation. I think the Carnotaur would just go into the crowd and just pick off whatever it could. Like, have you ever seen sharks, or even better actually, have you ever seen swordfish attacking schools of fish, and they will just whip any that they can target? They'll just whip them out of the school and then eat it, and then within like a few minutes the school has just been eaten. Basically, that's more interesting than the climax of this film, which is a herd of dinosaurs walk past another dinosaur.
Yeah, and they also kind of... It's like if the end of The Lion King was really, really boring.
So all of the herd of dinosaurs, they're too big, the Carnotaur can't pick them off. And instead it sees that Kron is attempting to climb the landslide, I suppose. And just goes like, okay, I'll just go after that one dinosaur instead, which is reasonable. It's hungry, it just wants an easy meal. And so Kron gets attacked by the Carnotaur. But obviously our hero can't let that happen. Aladar sees this happening and goes to help Kron. Ben, can you tell me how Aladar defeats the Carnotaur?
Well, to my memory, he doesn't. The Carnotaur just falls off a cliff.
I think he does push him a little bit. The answer I've put down is teamwork and pushing out off a cliff.
Well, the way I remember it, and admittedly that is questionable, but the way I remember it is Aladar and Kron's sister, Neri?
Correct.
I'm getting there. Aladar and Neri go, Kron's in trouble, let's go save him. And what proceeds to happen is the Carnotaur falls off a cliff and Kron dies. So their efforts didn't really achieve anything because the outcome is basically the same as if they'd done nothing.
Well, I think if they weren't there, it wouldn't have fallen off the cliff. I think they do push it a little bit, which leads me to my point, which is in so many dinosaur films, the only way you can defeat a bigger dinosaur is just by pushing it off a cliff, and I'm kind of sick of seeing that.
You're sick of seeing dinosaurs get pushed off cliffs.
This is the point I'm making about like quadrupedal animals. Like, what can they do? And when you're trying to ground it in reality, you can't have exciting set pieces. At least you can't have varied, exciting set pieces. Like, most animals fight in a very specific way, and it's what they've evolved to do. So if you're having a set piece, it will just be that. Like, the fight with the lions at the end of The Lion King, that's how lions fight. But if I watch 5 films that all end in a lion fight, I'm going to get sick of lion fights. And apparently all dinosaurs ever did to defend themselves was push other dinosaurs off cliffs.
And this is the thing, is...
How do we know this? Do you think there's just, like, cliffs out there that have lots of fossils at the bottom of them? And so scientists have just been like, I guess they pushed each other.
We think this dinosaur was pushed off a cliff. By this dinosaur, which was then pushed off a cliff. I suppose this is as good a place as any just to say 2 things about... Well, I've talked a little bit about the animation, but one of the reasons I noticed that I think it doesn't work very well with the live-action backgrounds is, as I say, for the time the CGI isn't bad, but because they've got these live-action backgrounds, the dinosaur's weight doesn't come across, because they've got, like, shots of just, like, a grass field or a sand embankment in a desert, and the dinosaurs, which are meant to be these huge, hulking great things, they just float on top of it, because obviously there's no footsteps going down, no weight being redistributed on the live-action shots, so they don't interact and integrate very well with the environment. And the other thing, and I think it only happens 3 or 4 times in the film, but sometimes they just have shots that are randomly in slow motion. I mean, I don't know why, it looks awful.
There's weird slow motion in this film, I forgot about that. The weight thing is a really good point. I appreciate this as a tech demo, and I think I prefer this to the alternative of it all being CGI, because I think with where the technology was, it would look bad. I think it looks better than stop motion dinosaurs on a live action background would have looked as well. I think that's fair to say. But yeah, just as a conceit, I don't think it was a good idea. But back to our plot, or what plot there is. You mentioned that Kron dies, and can you tell me how Aladar reacts to the death of Kron?
I'm going to cut this out because I just paused for 15 seconds and I couldn't think of anything. I don't know. I've no idea.
He immediately hits on his sister.
Ah, what a hero.
Kron's out the way. I've won the girl that I've shared 2 scenes with.
And this says a lot about how badly written Neri is as a character, is that she's just into it. So she's very loyal to her brother throughout this
she
film.
found him charming.
But what I mean is, she's very loyal to her brother. Like, she stays with her brother rather than helps anyone else throughout the film. But literally, her brother's dying, and / has died, and she's fine with it because, hey, I've hooked up with this charming dinosaur. Like, her only function is as a love interest and nothing more.
And with Neri's role of love interest served, we cut forward in time to the nesting grounds where we can see it flourishing, and we're seeing a new generation of dinosaurs being born, echoing the opening of the film, much like we did in Bambi and The Lion King, only this time it's a bit shit.
They even put the eggs in a circle, and it's like they want one of the characters to say, oh, we've come full circle, and here's a circle, and oh, we can't say circle of life though, so let's just have another monkey orgy, which is something that happens.
We might not be able to have a circle, but we can remind people of the start of the film, because Ben, your final question, what is the first thing the baby dinosaur does after hatching?
Does it piss on a monkey?
It pisses on a monkey. So you can remember Dinosaur as a film sandwiched between 2 scenes of dinosaur pissing on a monkey. What's the filling of that sandwich? Boring desert.
And then do we get a closing narration that it follows on from the opening one in the sense that it has no bearing on what we've just seen?
Well, strangely enough, this one is a little bit more related, because the closing narration is, none of us really know what changes, big or small, lie ahead. One thing is certain, our journey's not over. Thankfully it is. We can only hope that in some small way our time here will be remembered.
By archaeologists finding dinosaur remains at the bottom of cliffs.
But also, as it turns out, it won't be remembered by the people who just watched it. We're just really hoping that you as an audience member remember anything that you've just watched.
I know I've been playing it up, but honestly, it's just a blur. A very boring brown CGI blur.
If I ever had to label any of the animated classics as the black sheep of the animated classics, this is it. It is unlike any film we've seen before, and unlike any film that's going to come after it. And it's really bad.
What's weird is a lot of the films that are considered to be bombs on this film. So films like The Black Cauldron, a bunch of other films we've got coming up. A lot of those films were also commercial flops. Now, Dinosaur actually did really well financially, which I think kind of threw Disney a bit, or certainly probably messed with their creative flow, because this is after Fantasia 2000, which was very much a sort of sidestep celebration of Disney. This was their next big flagship film. And what follows is a decade of weird experimentation where they just can't seem to quite hit on a formula. I'm very glad they decided that this wasn't the formula, because, my God, if it had been 10 years of this. But I would be very surprised if, excluding the package films, because I think they are a slightly different beast, I'd be very surprised if the majority of people wouldn't put this in the bottom 5 of these films, because this film is very bad.
It actually upsets me that it was moderately commercially successful, because it was only successful on the novelty of it. Similar to, really, I think that Avatar is only as successful as it is because it was a novelty. Everyone had to go and experience the novelty of a film actually made in 3D with the intention of being seen that way, as opposed to weird gimmicks thrown on. And Dinosaur is similar to that, except the filmmaking behind it isn't great, and the storytelling behind it is basically non-existent. And it upsets me because just the year before, Fantasia 2000 was itself a novelty, and no one went to see it. And as I've stated in our discussion of that, I would love to see more of that. And yeah, I can understand Disney not really knowing where to go after this. Fantasia was a flop, and then this comes along, which was really just a glorified advert for a theme park, and does well. Like, I wouldn't know how to react to that or where to go in the future.
If you listen to our interview with animator Tao Nguyen, who worked on Fantasia 2000, Atlantis, Treasure Planet, and some of the other films coming up, he's such a happy, positive person. When we talk about all the different types of films that Disney are making at this time, his response is, hey, I love working on loads of different stuff. But notably, he didn't work on Dinosaur, so maybe that's why he's got such a positive view of that time period. Before we wrap up, Liam, is there anything else we need to talk about regarding Dinosaur?
There is just one thing, and originally I thought this was going to be the most difficult conversation we've ever had to have on this podcast, because we have to decide who the sexiest character in this sea of forgettable CGI monstrosities is. And at first I thought, well, it's obviously the meteor. But no, I think it's much clearer than that. So, Ben, who is the sexiest character in Dinosaur, and why is it the end credits?
So, we've had various films where there are no obviously sexy or sexualized characters, and sometimes we've really had to plumb the depths. In The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, we picked a sexy bee. In Saludos Amigos, I think we went for Goofy's horse. In The Black Cauldron, we went for a magic pig. So it's quite a weird field, but very sincerely, I feel nothing looking at any of these characters. I feel exactly the same way about each and every one of them, so it's really difficult for me to say that any of them are sexy. So, on the very loose basis that I think the Carnotaurs look the best out of all the dinosaurs, I'm going to say one of the Carnotaurs.
I'm not even giving it that credit. I'm sticking with my guns. I'm saying that this is, I mean, don't get me wrong, as a kid's film, I am glad it is completely sexless. But also the trade-off of that is it's completely devoid of any humanity. And I challenge you to name one thing that has provided you a greater sense of relief than the end credits of this film. Sexual or otherwise.
In summary, it's Dinosaurful, it's the bad dinosaur, it's the Land Before good CGI. Don't watch it. I was going to say unless. There's no unless. Don't watch it.
The thing that is so frustrating is it's hard to do, but I think someone can make a good dinosaur film. Just for once, don't make it about migrating and pushing bigger dinosaurs off cliffs. I want to see the Paul Verhoeven spaghetti western with dinosaurs. Is that too much to ask?
Release the Verhoeven cut. And by Verhoeven cut, I mean make a completely new film and release that, please.
Just get Disney to approach this octogenarian and be like, We have a proposition for you. What are you doing for the next 5 years?
Oh, you want me to work on the new Frozen film? No.
So, Ben, before we leave, we should really just decide. Just to really be clear, we need to decide whether or not this is making it onto the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics.
I'm very happy for this film to go extinct and be eradicated from not only any chance of going on our list, but to be eradicated from the Walt Disney list as well. It's charmless, and it is genuinely the most boring film I've ever seen.
You've made a really good point that I have to echo. Not only do I not want this going anywhere near our list, it completely perplexes me that it is considered in the canon of the Walt Disney animated classic. Just why is this in the canon? Just get rid of it. It's its own thing. It's a tech demo. It's what they did with the Lion King remake. Interestingly, the Lion King remake, I think, was all CGI. I don't think they were live action backgrounds at all. It came so far, like, maybe they could do Dinosaur today and it would be bad still because the Lion King remake was bad. But yeah, just get rid of it. Earlier this week, I had an endoscopy, which for several reasons I had to have without sedation. And midway through, I had an anxiety attack. It was one of the most uncomfortable and unpleasant things I've experienced. I would rather go through that again than rewatch this film for a third time.
Or give it a try, maybe you'll like it. But of course, this is just one set of opinions. Are we being too harsh on Dinosaur?
Do you know what? There is someone out there who this is their favourite film. Every film has someone out there who it's their favourite film. Whoever it is out there, I never want to meet you.
Do let us know what your thoughts are on this film. Maybe it's one you've got a lot of nostalgia for growing up and you've not revisited it in a while and you're worried that what we're saying is true. Or maybe you watch it a lot and you just feel we've completely missed the mark with it and we're overlooking the technical achievements that this film had. As always, we're very keen to know, and we're always very keen for a healthy debate on who the sexiest character is, although I think it's quite hard in the context of Dinosaur. Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics is available on YouTube, Spotify, and SoundCloud. And with that, Liam, what film are we looking at next time?
Well, Ben, I think you need to strap yourself in and prepare yourself for the worst tonal whiplash you can ever experience, because following the absolute CGI boring monstrosity that is Dinosaur, we're following it up with what many consider to be the wackiest of the Disney animated features. Released later in the same year, we are looking at 2000's The Emperor's New Groove. So remember to give it a watch, and all that's left to say is thank you for listening, and remember to join us next time for Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics.